The image that I'm showing right now is a painting that I did some time ago, I think a couple of years back, and it is hanging in my kitchen right now, and people tell me that they really like that painting, so I decided to create a smaller version of it. This time I'm using cradled birch board, and I have taped off the sides because I want the sides to be a wood finish. I'm going to add a stain to them later, and so I just used painter's tape. And then I put down gesso over the surface here, and I could have just primed it with regular primer, because I'm going to be putting wall patch texture over the whole thing. If you're going to use a wood panel for painting, then gesso works better, because it kind of gives a little bit of a rough surface, and that's called a tooth, and it kind of helps pick up the paint. Now, I apologize for the traffic out here, but it's just such a beautiful day, and summer is fast approaching, and then I'll be cooped up in the house all summer. It gets too hot here in Phoenix to be outdoors much in the summertime, so I'm taking advantage of this beautiful May day to paint outside. And this pattern is available on my website, craftandfabriclinks.com, at the link that I show on the screen. You can also see more of my work at christinasherrodart.com, and I show that link as well. So pause the video and write down these links, and I'll also post them in the description below. And on my website, I have many of my paintings shown, and I list the links for the patterns that go with those paintings. So for today, like I said, this is a cradled birch board, and I'm using my usual favorite textures, which is Drydex joint compound, and I'm also using Permanent Patch 102, which is like Permanent Patch 101 that you can see used in other paintings, except this is the one with the kind of like a gritty sandy texture. And this joint compound, I'm using that because I want to try putting impressions on it. In some of my other videos, I use a stencil, and I put the stencil down, and then I use my palette knife to put the wall patch over it. And you can see that on my playlist that I show. If you click on the little eye up in the upper right hand corner, that'll take you to my mixed media playlist, and you can see many more videos in there. What I'm using today then are these sheets that are called pressing sheets, where you put down a medium such as the joint compound, then you actually press into it, and it leaves these marks, and I think that'll be really pretty, and I can do it just where I want to. I want this to be built up with a higher texture, so I'll use I think just plain joint compound, but I'll decide as I go along. The background, I think I'd like to have this sandy texture, and I'll use all sorts of colors in here. I'll use my palette knife to create some tulips or something up in here in that vase. Basically, I'm following the same pattern that I did before. These pressing sheets are also used for creating textures on polymer clay. There's all sorts of fun things you can do with them, and I got a package of them that have several different types of textures, so I'll kind of play around with that. And I really like texture, and this doesn't have to be perfect. I don't have to stay exactly within these marks. Now, when you download the pattern for this, you can enlarge it or shrink it to fit your canvas or your birch board or whatever it is you're using. Of course, you can change it any way you want. So that's probably about all I need for that. I think I'll leave that about like that. So this has some nice texture in it. I could even add a few lines. The texture part goes fairly quickly. I think it adds a lot to the painting, and then when you go back later and add the gloss varnish, it really highlights these textures. Okay, I think that I will do this part. So I actually need my wall patch 101. I think I'll use for this part. And this doesn't have to be an exact circle. In my original painting, this is a rectangle, this was the circle, and I made this an exact circle to start with, but I just sort of penciled it in today. It doesn't have to be exact. Okay, this is my permanent patch 101. And if you go to the link that I showed earlier, I list all of the supplies there. And I also have written out directions. So besides downloading the pattern, you can actually get nicely written directions. So now it's really dry out here in the desert, so I'll have to work kind of quickly, I'm sure. That didn't really pick up the way that I thought it would. I think I'll spread that out and try it again. I like the idea of this, but I think I'm going to switch mediums. It seems like it should work. It should just put texture in it. It looks like it's doing it, but then when I lift it up, it's just sort of a mess. There's also the idea that maybe I have to push really hard. That maybe came out better. Set that to the side. Now I'm leaving all of this in the video so that you can see that things don't always go exactly as planned. So that gives me some texture. It's not exactly what I was after though, so I may go get some stencils. Okay, this is my favorite type of stencil. It's a very flexible plastic, and I got a package that comes with many different types of design on it. Like that. Just kind of adds a little interest, I think. Those will show up. Maybe a few little squares. My flowers will come down here, so I don't want too much stuff. But I think it's kind of nice having those few little flowers out there. It's kind of interesting in the composition. They'll just be background pieces. So see, this has a very gritty texture to it. It's as if little bits of ground rock were put in with it. Now I don't have to do the sides, because I have painter's tape around the entire outside edge. Okay, I wanted to show you a couple of other things while this dries. I bought this stylus. It has a metal tip with a little round ball on the end of it that's metal. And it's actually used for creating patterns as well, because you can push it into polymer clay or something like this. You can also use it when you're transferring designs using tracing paper and things. I got it just in case I needed to make deeper grooves around here to keep my pattern, but I found that I didn't really need it. I could see my lines underneath there, and the textures are different in each area. But if you were to have laid down an entire sheet of texture, entire layer of texture, you can use this to draw the lines. I've also used palette knife, but I saw this in a store and I thought it was kind of interesting. Another thing that I purchased, I went back to Philadelphia recently to visit a friend, and I went to an art supply store there, and I thought these would be kind of fun. So they can also be used. I just kind of feel like adding something different to an area. You can come through and see that changes things. I don't know if you can see that real well, but that just took out the texture in that area. So here's a close-up. That shows the lines a little bit in there. Okay, I did forget one thing. I'm going to have my 3 tulips up in here, and I need to add that texture now while I still have some ability to do that before everything dries. I didn't want to paint right on top of the texture that was there. My flowers wouldn't really show up that way. I want to define this edge a bit more here too. So this shows the texture a little bit better for you. This has dried overnight, and as you can see, the pink joint compound has now turned to a light color. That means it's ready to paint, and you can see the beautiful texture on here. One thing that I would like to point out is that when you build up the wall texture as much as I do, you can sometimes get little sharp areas. And if that happens, this is fully sandable. So you can just sand down anything that you feel might be a little bit sharp, and you can do that before you paint it. And at this point, I don't have to add any kind of primer or anything. This is all ready to be painted, and I just use my regular acrylic paints. And I'm going to start with the background. I like to start with the background, and then I move into my main pieces, and then I go back and add any touch-ups. So for the background, I'm using Payne's Gray, Russian Blue, Warm Gray, and White. And I think that's probably all I'll need, but I may change my mind as I go along. For brushes, I'm using the stencil brush, which I really like. I'm also using this 2-inch angled brush because that gets down into the areas really nicely. Okay, so I have my paints on the plate like I usually do. And get just a tiny bit of water, dab it off on my napkin, and I don't need a lot of paint because I want this background to be really pretty light in color. And the reason that I have this Payne's Gray is I may want to add shadows in some areas, and I normally never use black. I prefer a dark color such as Payne's Gray or raw umber if I want it to be more of a brown. For these smaller areas, I switch to a smaller brush. I can get down in there good. Okay, now I'll go ahead and add my vase and some of my background in through here, and that will tell me what I need to do next. So for that, I'm still staying with the Prussian blue, but I'll want a little accent in there with it, and I think I may add a tiny bit of alizarin crimson. So you can see if I threw in a tiny bit of this red in here, that just, it kind of gives it just this other little bit of color, which can be quite pretty. So with this, I just grab a little bit of blue, maybe a tiny bit of white on the other side, and that gives me the variation of color that I need. And I want to highlight this texture, so I'll go back with the detail brush and bring out the texture even more. If I add just a hint of Payne's Gray to my brush, you can see how much darker that is. And I can start bringing out some of the shadow down in the deeper grooves of my texture. You can come back with a small brush and add little highlights and things to some of these areas, and that really helps bring out those ridges and all of the detail of the textures. So I add darks and lights, and I throw in some other little colors that I feel like adding. And this top part here was really built up nicely, so I used a mix of Payne's Gray and white to kind of accentuate that area. When it's all dried, I can come back and touch up any little areas. Because it's so highly textured, sometimes the paint doesn't completely cover. And if you're going over areas that have already been painted but not dried yet, sometimes you'll actually pick up a little bit of paint. Okay, and here now I'll add my beige and blue and a little bit of gold. So for my gold, I'm just using various colors of cadmium yellow deep hue, medium hue, light hue, and I have this really nice Liquitex cadmium yellow medium that's a heavy body, and I really like that one. Okay, I'm going to let this part dry now, and I'll go on to the flowers, and then I'll come back later and add more colors in here. Now if you put the alizarin crimson directly with white, you'll end up with pink. And in this area I have added a little bit of the beige, which is warm gray with the orange, and that gives again a different look. Okay, now I need to let this dry because I have a lot of paint down here. I'll let that thoroughly dry and then I will decide what to do next. So I'm going to be leaving for a few days, going up to Utah and getting some ideas for paintings up there. And this will be thoroughly dry by the time I return. Okay, it's actually been a few weeks since I've worked on this because I've been experimenting with some other things. But now I'm ready to get my head back in the game on this one. I've decided that I really like using texture. So I'm going to continue to use a lot of texture. And what I was doing in these last couple of weeks was a bit of research on other types of texture. And I'm going to start planning different types of painting, so watch for those new videos in the future. I'm thinking I want to lighten this up just a little bit. Gonna brighten that up slightly. So I'm bringing in some warm gray and some cerulean blue. I'll just brighten that a bit. And I had added that alizarin crimson dark red, and I've kind of decided I maybe don't like it, so that might be a place where I come in with the lighter color. And I have a little bit of this yellow ochre that tones down the bright yellow just a bit, and another color of yellow, and then this is my green gold that I like to use, white, cerulean blue, and this is Prussian blue. And that's not real important. I'm just choosing colors that I think will look nice in here, and I'm remembering back to my original. I'm going to throw in a little bit of Hooker's green. Now that goes a long way. You really don't need much. I don't think I want too much more greenery up in there though. I think that's about enough. Maybe just a little bit in through here. I want to add a little bit of gold up in through here. I think I may just use my finger getting it in here. I'm bringing in a little bit of burnt sienna because I feel like I need something different down in here. Yeah, I think I like the little bit of burnt sienna down in here because it kind of balances better to my eye with the flowers up above. Bit of a shadow back in here. It's like a little bit of shadow back on this end. Yeah, like a little bit of white up in here. It's so dry right now in Arizona that my paints are drying very quickly. Okay, now I'm going to take my little tiny brush here, paint some little lines up through this. I'm going to add just a bit more detail on this face. Okay, now I'm going to just let that sit and dry. And colors always change ever so slightly when a painting is drying. So then I'll come back later and decide what I want to do. I think right now I can tell I'm going to want to lighten this area down here. I don't want it to be fighting with what's up above, but I'm going to let it dry first. Okay, I came back and brightened things up a little bit around some of these areas by using Titan Buff rather than the warm gray. The warm gray is just a bit duller, and I decided I needed to change things up a little bit. That brought in a little bit of brightness on this side, a little bit over here. I did some changes down through here. And I added a little distinction down in this area because my eye was picking up that it wasn't quite round. And like I said earlier, I didn't think it mattered for it to be perfectly round, but I just was noticing it just off a little bit, and it was really bothering me. So I went back and changed that, and then I just kind of added a little bit of blue into this area. And now I'm going to change up this color a bit and probably do a tiny bit more down here. Maybe even a little bit of this Titan Buff can go in down here. Dab in just a tiny bit more on the leaf here. Bring some yellow up there. Okay, I'm liking that better. So now I have a nice red color, and I don't want it real bright, but that's just a basic red, and I'm going to, I think, add that to, instead of white, I'm adding it to my Titan Buff. That brings in a bit more of a pink. Because I kind of felt like this color was just a little bit muddy. Okay, now I'll let that dry, and then I'll decide if I'm finished. This is a little bit too white right here. I'm just noticing that, so I'm just going to add a little touch of something there. And I think that's about it. Maybe just a little tiny touch up in here. So this will dry, and then if I'm happy with that, I will take the tape off of the sides, and then I'm going to stain the sides because this is all cradled birch. And it's just, the whole thing is wood. So I can stain the sides, and then I can add a coating of resin or high gloss varnish. I'll decide after it's all dry. Remember that you can get the pattern for this on my website craftandfabriclinks.com, and I'm showing the link right now. You can enlarge it or shrink it to whatever your needs are. I'm going to zoom in now so you can see the beautiful texture on this piece. Okay, now I want to point out just one more thing. I came back and added a little touch of purple right in this area, a few streaks down through the vase, and also down along this yellow base. Every once in a while I added a little touch of purple. And I think that just sort of brightens it up a little bit. The burnt sienna didn't quite do it for me. And I kind of thought about different colors to use, and then I decided that the purple tone would be nice. So you can see it just every once in a while there in the streaks on the vase. And it brightens up the base yellow a little bit too. So when you think you're finished, go ahead and watch it for a while, come back and look at it a few times, and you may be surprised at what comes to mind. So I always wait a few days before I actually varnish, and I look at it in different lighting as well.